Greetings. I want to show another open Ruy Lopez game. In the game between Marie Sebag and Maria Muzychuk, Black succeeded in mobilizing her queenside pawn majority and achieved an even position before eventually winning. In the game I'm about to show, between former world champion Viswanathan Anand and near champion Peter Leko, White blockades Black's c-pawn, thereby immobilizing Black's queenside pawn majority, and White eventually wins. As usual, I'll be showing the game on chess.com's analysis board using the chess engine Stockfish 12. This game was actually a blindfold game played in 2006 between Anand and Leko. How it's possible to play a really good game blindfold might be beyond many people's ability to imagine. But in fact, top-notch players can play really good games blindfold. Of course, a blindfold game is a game that's played without the players seeing the board, so that you make your move, and your move is then relayed to your opponent. Someone tells your opponent what move you made, and when your opponent makes a move, someone tells you what move he made, and you go back and forth. But you play the entire game in your head. It can't be easy to play really good chess all in your head, but top-notch players manage to do it. The game begins as a Ruy Lopez, since it's going to be an open Ruy Lopez. So it's a Spanish game. Black plays Morphy's move a6, putting the question to the bishop, will there be an exchange variation? Or will the bishop retreat? The bishop retreated. And knight out, and white castles, leaving this pawn available for black to take. Usually black doesn't take it, but black may take it. And in this game, black does take it. But black shouldn't take it with the expectation of retaining the extra pawn. Black shouldn't think, oh, I've won a pawn! Ha ha ha! No. White will get the pawn back. White will get the pawn back. White plays d4, and black does not take. That would be dangerous, opening up the e-file. That would be very dangerous. First, black kicks the white bishop, and then black plays d5. And white captures on e5, getting his pawn back. And what we see is that white now has a kingside 4-on-3 pawn majority. Black has a queenside 4-on-3 pawn majority. They're both healthy pawn majorities. So each side will have the potential to make a passed pawn. And now bishop to e6, knight b to d2. And you can see we're still playing book moves. Bishop to e7, c3, still in the book, castles, queen to e2. White is now threatening to win a pawn because white's attacking e4 twice. It's only defended once. So black moves the knight back to c5. Now you might expect white to retreat the bishop to c2. If white does that, then black can reply with d4. And white won't have this move, lining up the bishop and queen in a battery to threaten mate, while also attacking the defenseless black knight on c6. White won't have that because the knight on c5 controls e4. So white won't have that move. If white decides to kick away the knight first, so that the c5 knight will no longer control e4, and white will then be able to play queen to e4, threatening both mate and the defenseless knight on c6. Black will then have d3. And after pawn takes knight, pawn takes queen up. Sorry. Rook to e1, and then queen up. White's pawns are scattered even if he can hold them. This guy will eventually die, this guy will die, and white has scattered pawns, and it's just not so good. And black's bishops become powerful. Black will have the advantage of the two bishops on a semi-open board. Not good for white. So we go back. b4 won't work. Kicking the knight away won't work. And instead, we would simply see trades on d4. We would simply see trades on d4. Perhaps pawn takes pawn, knight takes, queen takes. And Stockfish evaluates the position as completely dead even, just dead even. And play would continue from there. White prefers to prevent d4 by playing knight to d4. Allowing black to take on b3, and white recaptures with his d2 knight, which now provides more control of d4 and also provides control of c5. And now black plays queen to d7, and white trades knights. White trades knights. And notice at this point it's plus 0.62. So half a pawn or a shade more for white. Well, okay. But we're going to come back to that as the game goes on. The margin is going to increase and increase and increase, but it's going to do it, for the most part, gradually. Bishop to e3, queen to c4, offering a queen trade. White does not go for the queen trade. And black plays queen to g4. And now that takes the queen away from the queen side. And white's going to pursue a strategy of blockading this c7 pawn by controlling c5. So he plunks his bishop on c5. Now this c pawn can't move forward to c5, which means it can't support this d pawn. So although black has a queenside pawn majority, it's going to be immobile. Black moves his rook over to e8. You might think that black could play bishop to g5. But white would simply play f4, and then black can't save both the rook and the bishop. So black plays rook a to e8. But now this rook is immobile. This rook has nowhere to go. That becomes important to move later. The rook to e1. Now, you might think, since the rook's no longer on f1 supporting f4, maybe now black can play bishop to g5. But white can play queen to d4. And now this rook is under fire. And either black retreats the bishop, or he trades queens first, and then retreats the bishop, and white can still trade bishops. So black doesn't really gain anything from that. So black moves back to g6. White plays f3. Now c6 for black. And white plays rook to e2. Black plays bishop c8. White doubles his rooks on the e file. You might wonder why white is doubling his rooks on a file that's not an open file. Well, it makes sense to put the rooks behind the e pawn because eventually, not right away, but eventually, white's going to be pushing his pawns to create a passed pawn or to try to create a passed pawn. He's going to try to be able to play e6. Now, maybe he won't be able to play it for a while, but it makes sense to line up the rooks behind the pawn, especially since there are no open files on the board. There are no open files. So it's not as though the white rooks were going to have to oppose black rooks on an open file. Instead, white's setting up. Black plays h6, and the queen moves to d4, further securing the bishop on c5. And there's more maneuvering. Queen to b4. Now white is actually threatening to win a piece. Bishop and queen battery is lined up on black's e7 bishop. Now white's actually threatening to win a piece. Well, queen to g5 defends the bishop. Okay. And now queen back to d4. I cannot tell you why white is maneuvering the queen to d4, then to b4, then back to d4. I can't really tell you why. Now black plays h5, and white plays g3. Now g3 might look like a funny-looking move. It might look funny-looking, but there's a reason for it. White can see that black plans to play h4, and white wants to be able to play g4. But if white waited, let's say white played a3, just to make it black's move, and black played h4, and then white played g4, well, what would happen? Black would be able to take en passant. Well, that would not be good for white. That would not be good for white. So white sees h4 coming, and when black plays h4, white wants to be able to put this pawn on g4. But he can't do it all at once because then black will be able to take en passant. So he plays g3 first. Now if black plays h4, and black does, after trading bishops, then the pawn can advance to g4. Okay. Notice white is still blockading the c pawn, and now he's even attacking it. Now, after white recaptured, black played h4, and I don't know how it would work out if white took on c6, but that doesn't look all that great to me. You can see Stockfish now gives black a slight advantage. So, no, white did not take. White played g4. And the bishop dropped back to d7, guarding the c6 pawn. And now white is ready to trade queens. And then white's going to try to win with mobile kingside pawns. This square is under the control of that knight, which can simply hop into that square. And if the queens come off the board, there will be no black knight to challenge this knight once it's on c5. Black will not have a dark squared bishop to challenge it. Black won't be able to challenge it with a pawn. That knight will be able to sit there forever. No rook will even be able to challenge it. That knight will be able to sit there forever, blockading the c pawn, which makes the black pawn majority immobile. Black doesn't like that and moves back to e7. And now king to g2. Stockfish prefers h3. I don't really know why. Now bishop to e6. In fact, Stockfish wants black to play f5, which may be why h3 was favored. Now queen to d4, bishop back. White's keeping the queen on this square, notice, because the black queen's also on it. If white takes the queen, say moves back here, well, then black will be able to play c5, at least if the bishop is defending this pawn. If not, then it'll be a pawn sacrifice. But white wants to keep this square under his observation. To c7, still can't play c5 unless he's going to give up the pawn. Knight to c5, blockading. Black plays rook to e7, white plays b4, securing the knight further. And black doubles rooks. And black's not making moves that look horrible, but you notice how the advantage is creeping up, according to Stockfish. And now knight to d3, a5, a3, queen to a7. And I want to point out that this is the open Ruy Lopez. I don't see a lot of open lines. We're about to open one, but it has taken a while. We're up to move 36. Not a lot of open lines, but it's an open Ruy Lopez. Go figure. And now knight to c5, queen to c7, king to h3, which actually threatens the h4 pawn. And we see the trade that opens up the a file. Queen back. And I doubt that white wants to take that pawn, with the queen there especially. I'm not so sure white wants to take it anyway, but with the queen there, especially not, because if white takes, well then, let's say rook takes check. I don't think white wants to take that pawn. That deprives white of his kingside pawn majority. And black will be able to trade rooks, and it just no longer looks like a good game for white. Well, I shouldn't say it deprives him of his kingside pawn majority, but it becomes a 3-on-2 against black's 3-on-2. But it opens up white's king to vulnerable, makes the white king more vulnerable. I don't think he wants to do that. So white plays f4. So now he's getting ready to push f5 and e6, or possibly f5 and f6. He's making his pawn majority mobile. He's been very patient about it, but he's making his pawn majority mobile while black's just sits there. Black seizes the a file. White plays f5. Now the rook comes down to a2. So now black's activating one of its rooks and making the king feel a little less safe, because now the king can't come back. So the king's cut off. That's not so great. Anand plays queen to f4. Leko sacrifices the d pawn. As it turns out, he's going to get the pawn back later. But he's sacrificing the pawn. White captures. And now with queen to d5, putting the queen where the pawn used to be, black has a threat. He's using his queen and rook together to generate some counterplay. The white king takes the pawn. The black queen moves into g2. White plays h3. Now black plays king to h7. And you might wonder, well, why would he do that? Well, of course, he wants to get his rook over to h8 to attack. The white king has just enough time here. Queen to f3. The rook over. White trades queens. And then king to g5. And then the king will be able to step back. The black queen is not still on the board. The white king will be okay. Now black comes over and threatens the d pawn. White plays rook to d3. And now black attacks the white b pawn. It's tough to defend both of those pawns. Rook to b3 guards and allows a rook trade. But if black trades, then, oh, all of a sudden the d4 pawn's defended. Instead, black plays rook to d2. White moves rook to e4, and black wins his pawn back. He is still down a pawn because white took the h4 pawn. So white is still up a pawn. And this is somewhat dangerous for white. But the king can step back here. Otherwise, the king would look a little unsafe. But he's okay. And white plays e6. And we see a trade of pawns. And you can see this is almost +7 for white now. This is a powerful passed pawn, guarded by the knight, which is itself guarded by the pawn. Black's 2-on-1 pawn majority is being held back. It's being held back. So you can't use it. Meanwhile, white can use the e pawn and potentially this 2-on-1 pawn majority. White can use his pawns. Definite advantage for white. Rook check, king back, g5 check. And for the moment, it might appear that this pawn restrains those two. And that's temporary. King to g6. And now rook to f3, which cuts off the black king so that this black king can't come over and help stop the e pawn. And white has the threat of playing e7. And he can play rook in and promote. It's dangerous here. Black moves back. Now the rook will be able to come to e1. And white plays e7 anyway. And this might look strange because black gets the check and white blocks and black trades rooks. And now the black king is able to take the e7 pawn. And that'll leave 3 pawns against 3. Has white blundered into a draw? Well, no. You look at Stockfish's evaluation, it's still almost +7. These pawns are blockaded. This pawn can never be attacked by the black bishop. So white can play on the king side with his pawn majority. White moves his king up. Instead of taking, black played king to e8. Stockfish prefers king takes e7. I can only imagine that the idea was that if black takes right away and white takes the opposition, then the bishop can't very well go there, can't very well go there because of white's knight. Can't very well go there because of, or at least so it might appear, certainly can't go there. Can't go there, can't go there. And if it goes there, then this trade leaves the white king able to come in. But in fact, that doesn't work. This king penetration doesn't work. Black's able to play c5, and look at the evaluation. Black wins. But that's all I can figure, that maybe black thought the bishop wouldn't have anywhere to go, and he'd have to give way with his king. And he can't go there, so he'd have to allow the white king to come in here. Maybe that's what he thought. I don't know. Anyway, Leko played king to e8. White played knight to e4, attacking the g5 pawn, which the bishop can't defend. Bishop to e6, knight takes pawn, bishop to d5. These two connected passed pawns are very, very strong. And the c pawn still can't move forward because the king is still guarding the square. Black finally takes the pawn. And now h5. And after king up, knight to e4. Black can't very well take. And the reason he can't take is, and you might think black is going to win the white pawns. But no, if he tries taking, this pawn gets away. This pawn gets away. This pawn gets away. So this is something important to remember. Once the pawns are like this, and there are only kings and pawns on the board, the king can't take the one that's behind, because the one in front will then just walk away. Make a queen. So it's okay for white to play this knight to e4 check move. That's okay. He doesn't have to fear that black will trade. Back, and now g5. And now the knight is ready to go to probably f5, but it's plus 11 in the evaluation. And I believe this is where the game ended. This is where the game ended. These pawns will win. Those connected passed pawns are really powerful, and white is still preventing the c pawn from moving forward. So this pawn majority never did get moving. Not when it was a 4-on-3, not when it was a 3-on, so it just didn't get moving. Didn't get moving. And white was able to use his pawns. And that was the difference. That was the difference. So I wanted to show that. I wanted to show that theme of blockading and of restraining, of preventing the pawn majority from becoming mobile. I wanted to show that. Anand-Leko would be proud. So that's it for now for the Open Ruy Lopez. Next up, the martial attack. As always, try to win, but more than that, try to play well.